You know, I am a big issues person. And when I was living in California, I'd find myself every summer getting frustrated about all these bills sailing through the legislature, passing all these committees. And you know, Susie, from when you were on the Progressive Caucus, and you've heard me lately, Ben, talking about why isn't the Progressive Caucus opposing this? You know, why aren't you guys more involved in actual legislation? And two things come to mind. I've done, a show on the first one, which is the 5G enabling bill. We were able to stop that in 2017 because Jerry Brown vetoed it because it took away local control. I don't think Newsom is going to do that. I think he's much more indebted to the telecom industry. So I'm curious as to why, the Progressive Caucus isn't opposing that. And the one I found out about just last week is this SB 9. I did so many shows about Scott Wiener and his SB 50. A couple of years ago, taking away local zoning. And it's really a real estate developer's wet dream, but it's being positioned as, oh, these millennials that can't afford to buy a house versus these selfish baby boomers, trying to keep single family zoning for themselves. And oh, it's going to be so much better because it's going to lessen pollution. These things are going to be dense and they're going to be near transit. Where this was tried in Vancouver, it was an abject failure. It did not result in any more affordable housing. So I'm kind of curious, Ben, from the Progressive Caucus point of view, why you guys didn't oppose this. And now I find that it's sailing right through where we've been able to stop him in the past.
Obviously, Susie can talk to the specific issue with great authority, as she's been really leading the charge against it. In terms of the Progressive Caucus and what the caucus has been focused on, I'm still relatively new to the caucus. Obviously, there was just a fairly recent election, so I can't speak on behalf of the caucus or even say why things occurred in the past the way they did. But what I can say is that the caucus is going to be focusing on a number of different areas. Goes without saying that the caucus operates within the party, and a lot of the activity of the caucus is within the party structures. And there is really a fight for power within the party. And most recently with the election, we saw Chair Rusty Hicks versus Delane Easton. And Chair Hicks has a very particular approach to the way that he runs the party and some of the decisions that he makes. The Progressive Caucus is against that by and large. So a lot of our efforts are going to be internal on affecting change on the party, on making the party function as a more democratic institution, and also ensuring that the money that the party is taking reflects our values, reflects our platform, and that we're not basically acting as a money laundering unit for the fossil fuel industry or for the pharmaceutical industry or what have you. So a lot of our efforts are in internal party struggles. But with that said, we do absolutely plan to and have been involved in some fights with legislation, and also an area where we see great importance is, of course, electoral politics and getting involved to elect progressives, whether it's at the local level, whether we're talking about state legislature, or whether we're talking about our federal candidates. So there's kind of a broad range of things that the caucus is working on. And have we been as active on particular pieces of legislation as we could or should? No, we haven't. And I expect that we'll definitely be stepping up in that area.
Well, Susie, to continue on SB 9, and there's also SB 10, these bills we were able to stop in the past. And one of the big reasons was Holly Mitchell. And she was able to pull all the Los Angeles Democrats together because, the way the Crenshaw Subway Association explained it, it was going to be a war on South LA because these are Black neighborhoods where they built up, equity in their homes, and there'd be so much pressure to sell. And now she's, of course, not in the legislature anymore. She's on the board of supervisors. I'm wondering, was that a factor? What else was it? The pandemic? A lot of stuff just got snuck through because of the pandemic. They weren't even meeting. What do you think is the reason this is going through?
Yeah, so let me give a little bit of information to people who don't understand this in the context of California. So we have 161,000 people who are homeless in the state of California. I live in Los Angeles, where we have over 60,000 people in the county who are homeless and over 40,000 in the city who are homeless. any type of housing production bill that doesn't have a requirement for homeless housing or affordable housing is absolutely unconscionable. But that's what we have. And what this bill does is allow developers to speculate, particularly in low-income communities or communities of color, and knock down homes to put up market rate housing, which will then attract primarily affluent people, primarily affluent whites, into a community, price people out of their neighborhood, and then cause displacement. And we have seen this come to the legislature now for 3 years in a row. And this, we did manage to get the bills watered down a bit, but they still do not require any affordable housing or homeless housing. So I don't know why the Progressive Caucus didn't take a position on this, because the California Democratic Party went neutral and the LA County Democratic Party was overwhelmingly opposed to it. And then we saw that a number of our legislators, who are just basically corporate developer shills, they take a lot of money for the California Apartment Owners Association. The California Chamber of Commerce was behind this. And then the corporate developers are behind this, of course. And Scott Wiener, who takes a lot of money from corporate developers, and a lot of legislators were supporting this. But also, we had so-called progressives like Assemblymember Alex Lee and Assemblymember Ashley Cora supporting this. And where was the Progressive Caucus at that point saying, hey, this is not progressive. You are not providing any housing at all for people who are low income. And that could be 80% area median income and below, right? Or any housing for people who are homeless, with 161,000 people who are homeless. So it basically creates housing for people who pretty much already have it. And it creates housing for people who can afford market rate. And so to give you an idea, to afford market rate in Los Angeles, which is like an average of $2,450 for an apartment, you would have to make about $7,500 a month to afford the type of housing that they're going to build under SB 9 and SB 10. And it's absolutely outrageous. And we have had LA Urban League, Coalition for Economic Survival, the LA County Democratic Party, New Frontiers Democratic Club from South LA, that even the LA City Council voted against it, but the mayor would not sign or veto it. So it's still, the city of LA still considered neutral. Save Santa Monica is against it. And with all this against it, we ran a poll, right? We hired David Binder, who is one of the top pollsters in California, and there's no constituent support for this. 71% oppose SB 9, 75% oppose SB 10. So this shows you how much power the corporate real estate industry has in the state of California. I mean, even to the extent that, we always talk about the French Laundry, but that French Laundry dinner was actually a birthday dinner for Jason Kinney, who is a lobbyist for the real estate industry, right? So we see the impact. And when progressives don't step up to say we need affordable housing, we need homeless housing, and they only maybe focus on like two issues outside of that, what happens is it gets deprioritized. And I think that, we're making the case now very strongly. We put a lot of full page ads in the paper. We're doing a lot of banner ads. We've had a lot of texting, a lot of phone banks to our legislators and to the governor. We have gotten a coalition of people who represent communities of color, who have come in and explained how this is going to impact their neighborhood and lead to more gentrification without an affordable housing component. And it has literally just fell on deaf ears. And so it's sailed through the assembly, both bills, sailed through the Senate first, then the assembly. We managed to water down the bills a little bit. And then both bills just passed the Senate today and are making their way to the governor's desk.
It sounds like direct action is needed to get all these renters and people who are worried about being priced out of their houses to hold this over his head. I mean, that would be something if you could pull that off in the next 2 weeks, but it sounds like that would be, it's very disappointing to hear that Alex Lee is in favor of that because he has that great bill for social housing. The only thing to provide true affordable housing. We're having the same issue in Asheville with this upzoning, this building that's being done on the French Broad River, and they're going to get all sorts of local government assistance and only 7 apartments, and it's going to be 80% AMI, which means they've got to be making like 42,000, and the average median income in Asheville is like 24,000. So this using these neoliberal market-based mechanisms of trying to incentivize real estate developers to do true affordable housing that somebody on a minimum wage could afford, it's not economically feasible, which means only the government can provide it. And that's why, the infrastructure bill is so important. I don't know how much money is in there for public housing, but I know that Joe Biden wanted $20 billion. Chuck Schumer, fearing a challenge from AOC, he said it should be $40 billion. And AOC in her Green New Deal has $120 billion for public housing. So, on a show like I did last night, trying to get this reconciliation bill passed, which would expand Medicare, you have no idea. I spend way too much time on Twitter, and I'm sure you do too, Ben, that the purity left, that's what I'm calling them now, the purity left is like, oh, well, it's not Medicare for all. But guess what? Getting dental, vision, hearing, having Medicare negotiate with big pharma, dropping the eligibility age to 60, that's going to make a material difference to tens of millions of people. And if people want Medicare for all, what do they want it for? They want people to have health care, right? This is going to give people health care. So they're going to sit on the sidelines while Bernie's working his ass off. I mean, the man is 80 years old practically, and he's schlepping around the country trying to sell this thing. And these purity left are sitting here tweeting that, it's not enough. So, and calling the squad the fraud squad. But I digress. Susie, what are you asking people to do?
There are people who, live in specific communities that are going to be devastated by this, who are basically saying, like, I have my ballot and I'm just not turning it in. And that's more for me of a concern, right? Because like I said, you don't want that apathy. And so, I don't know if the governor will make a statement or sign the bills before the recall. I have absolutely no idea what the governor's office is thinking about this. I mean, what we've heard is that he is likely supporting SB 9 and 10. But I don't know in the context of the recall how this works. And there is a firewall between the campaign and the state government, which of course you want that, right? But if you complain to the campaign, that won't necessarily make it to the governor's staff that's working at the state level, because that every consultant had to sign something saying that there would be that firewall, and they would not go to the governor's office with issue-based, anything policy-based or issue-based regarding the recall. United Neighbors is definitely, I don't advocate for this, but they are definitely, holding onto their ballots because they're waiting to see what the governor is going to do on SB 9 and 10. More importantly than that, there just is no constituent support for it.